Good morning, and probably another minute or so, Trey will get started.
Okay. Well, what I can do right now is let everybody know that I'm going to be sort of a storyteller, being from Mississippi with John Grisham and Eudora Welty and a bunch of grant writers. It's all about the story, and I think you'll find in this particular session a pretty neat story. And probably came about, some of the story piece to it about the Brownfield unicorn piece is when you're in a pandemic and you're locked in your whatever place you're at, sometimes reality and fantasy sort of blend together. And so when the Florida Brownfield Association was looking for topics, this haze came over me, and I said, there might actually be some unicorn or some kind of story behind all of this. And our panel has graciously given up their bright and early morning for some of us Central Standard Time folks and some of the Eastern Time Zones folks. I think you'll find that this is a really neat session. So with that, I think we'll get started. One thing to point out is, if you don't mind for questions, we're going to let this be somewhat fluid. We got a lot of folks on here that are speakers that can handle it on their feet, kind of thing. But if you have a question, maybe pop it in the chat feature, and from there we will get started. So as you can see in front of you, you will see that once upon a time, there was a dragon that lurked in the land of Louisville, and that's Louisville, not Louisville. And there was a legacy that was hanging over the kingdom. And from that, we're going to talk a little bit about what the Brownfield unicorn looks like. And really, if you want to break it down in terms of brownfield, so what are the characteristics of a perfect brownfield project? Have you got liability protection? What kind of state level involvement, EPA level, Superfund projects, private sector cleanups, incentives, and public input and engagement? So what we've got here is we're going to share with you a little bit about this and our team's attempt at and ultimately found the unicorn that now grazes peacefully in the land of Louisville. So let's start off with the dragon. We talked about the dragon being there. And if you look at this picture of the American Creosote site, you'll see that even that hood over the top looks like some wings of this. It was a 120-acre Superfund site that used to do pressure treatment of wood products from creosote and coal tar, and had a lot of nasties for that from 1912 until 1997. And then the early 80s, it actually discharged a lot of its waste into 3 ponds on site. So we have Railroad Lake, which was about 7 acres at the time. And right next to it's a residential neighborhood. Just around the corner is a school. And so on 2001, the EPA and the state, because this was a fund lead site, which means that there was no PRP anymore. We listed it. This was when I was at DEQ. And so at that time, we've got ourselves a dragon. And with a dragon, we needed a dragon slayer. And so with that, we decided as our team, one of the first things we needed was a guide, someone who could work us through and provide guidance. And with that, we'll start with our guide, which is Bill Denman. The character here, of course, the strengths is that he can be a dragon slayer, and his positive attitude and loyal to the group. And look, the ability to slay a dragon, that's something to be said. But here's the thing, when it comes to EPA Superfund and Superfund program, guidance is the name of the game. And so much like our friend over here from Shrek, there's many layers and many words and many interpretations and many definitions. And so with that, we've got to think through what kind of character this is, and how in the world would our guide become a dragon slayer. And so with that, let's talk a little bit, let Bill share with us a little bit about himself, and then also how he slayed the dragon.
Oh, well, thank you, Trey. Well, in addition to being good at making waffles and being able to tame some dragons, I work in the, right now I'm chief of the Redevelopment and Chemicals branch, which has the Brownfields program, but for many, many years, I was the Superfund Redevelopment Coordinator and also a remedial project manager in Region 4. So this wasn't my site that I was assigned to, but it was, of course, in our division, and I worked closely with, first, I guess it was Mike Arnett and then Michael Taylor, who were the RPMs for the site, to help plan for what we call, and this is one of the many words or many acronyms, is the RAFLU, or the Reasonably Anticipated Future Land Use. So like Trey said, this site was listed in 2001, and because, and we do varying levels of determining the RAFLU based on the situation at the site. Some sites are owned by a responsible party. They're in an industrial park. We can talk to them as the owner, and if they say, we know for sure that we're going to, keep this property, and then when it's cleaned up, we're going to sell it, it'll be industrial use, then that's a pretty easy assessment to determine what the reasonably anticipated future land use is. But in some situations, like here in Louisville, where you didn't really have a property owner, or the future use of the site really wasn't determined, and that's the case with a lot of the wood treating sites. We've seen this in Camilla, Georgia. We've seen this in Pensacola. We've seen this across in Brunswick, Georgia. We have a lot of wood treating sites across our region, and in many cases, they're right in the middle of town or close to town, and if they become abandoned like this, they have, because of the nature of creosote, they have contamination that is hard to address. So we from one standpoint are working on what the cleanup of that should be, but on another standpoint, we want to know what the future use of that property is going to be, so that we can then design our remedy and conduct our risk assessments based on what that reasonably anticipated future land use. So it helps guide us to get the dragon going in the right direction. And so at this site, and we have various tools for doing that. I'm currently on detail to EPA headquarters, working in the Superfund Redevelopment Program. And if you've read the Superfund Task Force or been involved with Superfund Redevelopment at all, you'll know that EPA supports the redevelopment of Superfund sites. We view this is why we're cleaning them up, so that we can help communities heal from having had been impacted by these Superfund sites. And in fact, there's a great quote in our 2019 Superfund annual report that says the real, paraphrasing here, but it says the real success of the Superfund program is how we're able to get sites cleaned up and put back into productive use to help revitalize communities. And so that's our ultimate goal. And it's just been so much fun to be involved with this over the years, and particularly at a site like Louisville. So we have different tools to determine that reasonably anticipated future land use. We can do just a quick reuse assessment, or we can look at what future planning or zoning plans are from the cities and things like that. But in this case, we did the gold standard for reuse planning, and it's actually called reuse planning, and we have guidance for it. And the Superfund program out of headquarters, or as part of the site cleanup, will actually fund reuse planning. So this isn't something that the city had to pay for, or that anybody had to pay for. It was part of our job to determine what that reasonably anticipated future land use was. And so in doing that, we formed what was called the Land Use Committee, and that was made up of, I think it was 28 different members. Is that right, Trey? Something like that?
Yeah.
So several people that represented different interests at the site. We had community members, local government leaders, state leaders, and in that, we went to the Land Use Committee, and we tasked a contractor. In this case, it was, and this was almost initially. So the site was listed in 2001. By 2004. the Superfund redevelopment program had provided the resources to have a contractor come in and help facilitate this. And at the time, that contractor's name was E Squared. They're now named Skio Solutions. So if you see two reports, one with E Squared and one with Skio Solutions, it's the same company, many of the same people that were involved with this, and they do some great reuse planning and reuse work for us, among other things. But so we provided the funding for the contractor to come in and form this land use committee, ask, what people wanted to see. What does the community want to see in this property? And they can also evaluate what the surrounding land uses are, what the condition at the site is. So for example, on this site, part of it's in a floodplain, part of it, was likely going to have some kind of, be impacted by a remedy, be under a cap or something like that. And some of it was not that impacted at all. So they can help formulate that discussion with all of those various interests and report out to the community at large. We formed the land use committee to work with, but this is a representation of the entire community and is reported back at our public meetings to the community. So in this case, in 2005, we came up with our first reuse plan. And what you're seeing on the screen here is 10 years later, we had completed the cleanup and it was ready, to be redeveloped. And this, but it needed an update to the reuse plan. So we also funded this reuse plan update in 2015, which was a much shorter document, but aligned with what the current priorities were at the time for redevelopment and what the possibilities were. And so now in this land use committee, I did kind of brush over this, but I want you to know that this, involving the community, we held, what many people call charrettes, or, public availability sessions for people to come in and give their ideas. And so we were able to kind of evaluate those and kind of fit that to the Superfund site. So by 2015, we came up with this updated plan. We, basically came up with these two proposals here as a rail park for transloading facility. And some working on rail cars, which Trey is outlining there for us, and also an ecological component of it down in the green area there, which is the area that's in the floodplain and is very suitable for some sort of either public access or trails or park or whatever. And the important thing here, I think, is, and we'll be talking about this in the middle, in a minute, is the formation of the team and the champions. And Trey's going to talk about those champions coming up in the presentation, but that's really important that we can fund this planning, we can help get this information, we can help cool off the dragon, but somebody has to help us lead it in the right direction and make these things happen, because that's outside of what EPA is able to do. So
Bill, maybe can I give you a couple of questions? Because I think
yes, please do. Yep.
Yeah. So I guess the initial planning document. Well, first off, this is the reuse concept plan, and it's roughly about 4 or 5 pages to it. But the original one, it was what, 70, 80 pages worth, and
very detailed,
and had a lot of information in terms of I guess looking at the current uses, look at what the current zoning was. So it did a great deal of really comprehensive evaluation of not just the property itself, but also what's around it and what would be a good fit for the area. As far as nearby receptors, which obviously for EPA, right over here, wasn't this about this location? There's a church right there, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, and then over here, which we'll see in just a minute in some of the other figures, is the school. So obviously you've got a lot of, EPA has their first and foremost role, which is public health and safety piece to it. But obviously the second piece is, well, what are we going to do with this thing after the fact? Because the other piece is right here. This is talk a little bit about what this is and what, in terms of the remedy, what's long-term issues maybe going on with the site too.
Okay. Well, I'm not that familiar with the site cleanup and exactly what happened. I do know that we have a capped area that where we have capped soil, and you can see that on the photo on the right. And so there would be some limitations as to what could be built on top of that. I believe you're pointing at the Greenway area there. It looks like where we have some public access and some trails, either on or through the site.
Yeah, that was some discussions on that, but the key thing, and let me just kind of segue into the next piece. So as far as Bill, so if a community out there, some of the folks listening right now, they have a Superfund site. So how much? I was telling folks at the beginning of this, if you remember the Cat in the Hat and the infomercial, I'm gonna be that infomercial guy at times. So Bill, exactly how much does this cost the community if you have a Superfund site?
Yeah, well, this doesn't cost anything. Like I said, this is part of our.
This is free? Are you telling me it's free?
It's free to the community. Yes, it's part of our response action at the Superfund site because we're required by our guidance to determine the reasonably anticipated future land use early on in the site. And so we do that in various ways. And in some cases like this, a full-on reuse plan, is what's needed where the future use of the site is uncertain. So.
Well, super. Well,
Yep.
With that, thank you, Bill. And again, as we kind of work our way through, please chime in if you have some
I will.
this as well.
I would just add one thing that, and that this is what, not to steal any thunder from the beginning, but, if you have a Superfund site like this in your community, almost certainly you have brownfields around it. These are like the, little birds that fly around, big dragons or whatever. These are going to be other areas that have been impacted or have the perception of being impacted because of the fact that you have a Superfund site. And so I think that's the beauty, and that's how you get the unicorn.
Okay. Well, super. Well, part of that process, everyone, was involvement of the city. And of course, one of our our next major players in this is the Great Council. To steal a little bit of the Game of Thrones concept here. In this case, it actually was the Lords of the Land. And this is the Board of Aldermen and the mayor and some of the key members of this, because let's remember that, and if you can learn anything from this session, it's about a team and it's about a lot of folks understanding their roles with this. And of course, this is the Board of Aldermen. You've also got here Babs Fulton, who's the city clerk, who was the Brownfield project manager on this as well. But with that, they also commissioned their number one hero, which is Mayor Will Hill, to go out and do his thing. The key thing I think about brownfield redevelopment and for Superfund redevelopment, for that matter, you got to be fearless. In this case, Will had a Superfund site in the middle of town that, if you want to think about it, two sides of the tracks kind of thing, that was impacting both sides. And the challenge, of course, is when EPA is saying, well, there's this a fund lead site, it's been abandoned to the state of Mississippi, which is what happens when people don't pay their taxes in Mississippi. It's abandoned to the state. And then the EQ comes to our hero and says, hey, wouldn't it be great if you, the city of Louisville, owned a Superfund site? And of course, I don't know about you, but the first thing I would say is, well, why would I want to own a Superfund site? But with both boldness as well as vision, and look, the key thing I think that comes out of this is that whole planning process that took place with EPA coming to town, 27-member land use committee talking about this one big dragon. What are we going to do? But what it does is it also brings people together to look at what can be done with our city. And I'm going to speak to, just for a moment, get on my soapbox about rural brownfields. One of the biggest challenges that I find in rural areas is that the planning that needs to happen, oftentimes the resources are not there, and the resources are not just money. It's also the people that understand the intricacies of land uses and land use planning and all of that. And so my concern is with the brownfield grants, the way they go these days, seem to be moving towards, tell me that you've got a great super plan already in place to make this happen. Well, if you've got a plan in place, you probably already have, to some degree, a good chunk of the resources to make things happen anyway. And so just a shout out to the rural folks out there, having having these kinds of things happen and then tying them all together is a big deal. So what we've got here is Will and the Lords of Louisville were presented with a memorandum of agreement where the city took ownership of the property, but the Mississippi DEQ was responsible for O&M, operations and maintenance. And just an FYI, if you do have a Superfund site, be aware that most of the cleanups are going to be something on site that will leave contamination in place, and that there will be, and in this case, there's the ROD required excavation and consolidation on an on-site capped area. Well, that capped area is not going to clean itself up. It's just going to be there for a long time. And so understanding those intricacies, understanding who's responsible for what is an important piece of that. So I do encourage you to really think through long-term on this, because if you do take ownership, ideally you're going to have something like this with the Mississippi DEQ, where they're responsible for that, for dealing with any erosion concerns or issues with that. So again, we've got the Lords of Louisville that came into play, but also about this same time frame. So we're talking about 2015, 2016. In 2014, actually, a tornado ripped through Louisville and destroyed one of their major industries there, also destroyed the hospital, killed dozens of people. And that was part of their story for brownfields. And so another piece came into play, and this was the hero number 2. And the key to this hero, of course, is that he brought some history. He also brought an understanding, and basically with that, I'm gonna let Glenn. Well, let me also just say this: what really was a key thing here is consensus builder, all for one, one for all. And of course, one of his weaknesses is he does have the occasional hairball. So with that, Glenn, you want to take over?
Be happy to.
All right. So Glenn, I guess this is your Superfund site, and maybe just for a moment, can you kind of share with everybody when you first came on board, maybe a little bit about who you are and what your background a little bit, and what you kind of came on board, and what the role of the partnership is with the chamber and all that.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Glenn. I'm actually been in economic and community development for over 10 years, getting closer to 15. I came to Louisville, Mississippi in June of 16. So I was during the middle of this, finishing up the cleanup with the transition of the property to the city of Louisville. And going through all this, with the reuse plan or the conceptual plan that Bill talked about earlier, we actually from the get-go, especially from my standpoint, as a determination for coming on board, was how much of an asset this is going to be. And we are an organization that handles all the economic development activities in the city of Louisville, as well as the town of Noxapater and the county at large. We're at the Winston Partnership, and we have a blue collar manufacturing type feel to our county. And one of the assets that we have is the railroad, the KCS line that runs right up through the center of town, which is right on the eastern border of that blue line where Trey is putting that red dot. And it is a lifeblood to several of our industries here, specifically the Winston Plywood and Veneer, which is a little bit where that red dot is to the right of that. But more importantly, we see it as an opportunity to enhance our railroad and our railroad usage in that area. And one of the things that this concept and this actually has been able to do for us is on that layout, specifically towards the north end where that dot is, we have actually installed a city-controlled facility, which we call the Louisville Transload area, which is operated by a company called US Rail in a partnership with the partnership in the city of Louisville, and they handle all the transloading. Now, for people who don't know what transloading is when you have an opportunity for a business who doesn't have access to rail, that they're able to move product in and out of rail. So we have forklifts and other type of material handlers will come in and load rail cars for shipment out to products, whether it's east or north, but it's been a nice boon to our area. And this couldn't really have been done without the vision of that retail and the reuse concept plan that was actually laid out earlier. What you're seeing right here on on your screen right now is what we have is what we call the Louisville Rail Park project. This is an opportunity for us to put in $2.5 million into this particular site. The currency that you have, what you see right now in actually the blue, is the actual existing rail that is there. The portion of the project that we're working on, the $2.5 million, is kind of twofold. Right where Trey is, we're putting down new rail. We're putting about 750 linear feet of new rail to tie our transload area back into the north switch along the KCS line. But more importantly too, we're actually rerouting the traffic away from the park so we could actually have more of an light industrial rail type feel to that park. So future phases 2 and 3, which you will see moving to the left of your screen, which is where the white rail is, in regards to what we plan to do in the future, which is largely based on some of the concepts of the reuse concept, the figure 3 that Bill was going over earlier. We're going to make some adjustments to that, but coming as a situation where the EPA came in and did some of the reuse concept based on feedback, things of that nature, has held pretty true to where we are right now in November of 2020. So this is a great project for us. We're excited about the opportunities. We're starting to see a lot more interest in fabrication of rail cars, sterilization of rail cars. So we believe that this footprint will continue to expand along this phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 in this reuse concept area of the former American Creosote plant. And we could not be in this position if it wasn't for the assistance of EPA as well as the state partners in DEQ.
So one thing, Glenn, maybe you can share a little bit about, I guess, a safety issue. So not only is this expanding the footprint you're planned here to close Vance Street, but right now this is a road which you've got Island Middle School, as well as what Bill had pointed out. This is the church that we were talking about that now instead of having a big pond of creosote, they now have at least some green space and something to look out the sanctuary that's a lot nicer looking. But talk a little bit, I guess this is a public safety issue here, I mean, that y'all are looking at, as well as sort of rerouting some of this, because is this somewhat of a local drag strip? Is that correct?
That is correct, Trey. I was getting ready to say that's the very first place that the pink line that goes straight down has been used in the past for teenagers and others. That is more of a raceway drag strip, that mainly because of the fact that the activity around the creosote plant was no longer in service. Over the years, it became just a straight thoroughfare, specifically straight through the western portion of that, which is on the top of your screen, through a neighborhood. So the idea was to, right around that, the capped area where the covenants are, is to cul-de-sac that out and reroute the traffic safely away from the neighborhoods, but more importantly, away from the industrial place. So you didn't have the rail issue, much less the heavier traffic in regards to industrial side that would be flowing through there. We're on the north side where the proposed rail phase 2 is, where we're putting all the new rail down. We are going to close off that street and extend it further for safety. So that was one of the things that we addressed early on in this project, is to reroute the traffic away from the Barrymore Street to minimize the traffic flow, much less discourage that as a major thoroughfare, and kind of specifically use it for industrial purposes as what it was meant to be.
So y'all.
I'm sorry.
No,
Trey,
go ahead, Bill. Go ahead,
Glenn,
Bill.
I had a question. So can you expand a little bit on how the reuse plan helped with this? I mean, did it help by getting community buy-in, or by getting EPA, by writing down EPA's support, or was it just the plan itself that, you could go to people and say, look, there's been some thought as to what could be done here, and kind of jump started this project because of just the ideas, or maybe?
Well, I think that's where you are, is the early on information that was gathered and the concept that was put together was pretty doggone good for envisioning for your future. So that was a valuable tool in regards to what are we going to do with this site? Which direction should we go in? And as I grew into getting the information coming in June of 16 to where we are now, it made more sense to continue to focus on rail, to see the success that we had with US Rail, but more importantly, the activity in the inquiries we have with rail sites. And I think that's one of the things that I want to emphasize is even though that it is a Superfund site, it is a clean site. It is an approved site. It is next to major assets. And that's one of the things that we're going to focus on and harp on. And I think that we are in this position because of the program, the foresight, the planning phase, and it's been a catalyst for where we're moving forward in regards to not only envisioning what we are, but also for the capital investment that's going to be involved in this rail park.
So Glenn, sort of segueing in, so obviously some of this work here is off of the Superfund site, which is to me, leverage resources, which is an important aspect to a lot of the redevelopment efforts that cities have. But also, why don't we talk a little bit about this word here and what this area, which is, so the Superfund site stops here, and this is, I believe, Cagle, is that right?
That's correct.
And so just north of the Superfund site is this lovely thing here, which actually this word actually is for this, but it's fairly crowded. So what exactly do we have here? And then let me dovetail that in as well. And with that, maybe a little bit about your past history with Monroe County and how this kind of all of a sudden morphed into something else.
Well, I think for here is my familiarity with the Brownfield project, which is, I know that we recently just had a closing date on grants being due for that. But I had the experience and the actual just familiarity that these Brownfield grants can turn into something that could be positive for economic development. And what Trey is putting there and kind of putting in front of you is right where it says Brownfield site is we had had the privilege of receiving one of those Brownfield assessment grants through EPA in I think it was September of 17 that we're now sunsetting on. But we had an opportunity to the city had an opportunity to acquire some land through a former junkyard facility. And of course, as you know, there's going to be some environmental concerns and things of that nature. But as we went through the phase 1 and phase 2 of that, we've got a clean bill of health to do that. And we are expanding that, rerouting the traffic away from that, but also expanding the US Rail, our transload facility there, so we can have more cars and actually make it more of an industrial rail concept there. But we couldn't have been able to do that unless we had the resources in place to do that, because as Trey mentioned earlier, I keep calling you Ray for some reason. I apologize, Trey. That when you deal with rural development, it's a resource game, and you don't have the staff, you don't have the funding, and there's a lot of things that you don't have in play as compared to other more urban type settings. So we use this as a tool for economic development, and you'll see later on that it can be used for different ways of economic development. But this particular opportunity came about through that EPA Brownfield grant assessment, and enabled us to continue to use it as a catalyst, not only from the Superfund site, but also to spur business. We're at about 10 jobs there. I would say it's spur about 8 solid, good paying jobs. We're trying to make this footprint bigger because the more cars we can handle through this particular space, especially where that Brownfield site is on the north part, the more jobs we can create in regards to sterilization and fabrication and even transload. So we're excited about this whole initial concept of what we're doing and the impact that we're getting and the feedback we're getting from not only the KCS and Watco, but more importantly, from our local business owner.
So what you've got here is so in 2017, the city had already identified this brownfield, this old junkyard, as a property that they needed to acquire. So they actually went in 2014, did a phase 1 on that, and that teed it up to where it was an eligible site to do a phase 2 on, but recognizing that there was still some unfinished business there. And so it also, because it dovetailed with the overall plan for the area, they decided to go look at other resources out there, which kind of leads us into our next team member. And the next team member, you know, the great thing about this team member is that, and actually, guys, I went on looking up SAGE on Google, which we all know Google is truth. So I looked up SAGE, and under strengths, no lie, the word revitalizing the team was there. And I thought, who better to be there to revitalize our team, of course, is Miss Cindy Nolan. So pointing out a couple of, you know, holding some of her abilities. She has these healing orbs, and you can see the orbs in her holster here, so to speak, that she can hurl over a damaged ally and activate healing over time power. Notice the key term here: in rural brownfields, time is a challenge a lot of times because it ain't happening tomorrow. Bill can even attest that the work on the Superfund site started in 2001. 2005 was the first reuse plan. 2015 was the next. And so the challenge, of course, is that. But here's her weakness. And there's paperwork that she's required to review to ensure the ally is eligible to receive a healing orb. She only has a limited number of orbs to distribute each year, and they're competitive. So with that, let's move in a little bit, and Cindy, maybe talk a little bit, of course, with the brownfields, but you know, where you see some of this playing out with in the brownfield world.
All right, thanks, Trey. Well, first I'll say that I get to be sage because actually I've been at EPA for 36 years. And that makes you sage. And my first 15 were spent in the Chicago office. 10 of those were in Superfund. So I was in Superfund in the first 10 years that it existed. And we took on a lot of sites, and there's hardly a site nastier than a creosote site, truly. They are just pea soup. I mean, just so bad. You know, unlined pits, the whole bit. They're really, truly dragons in that sense. And then I did some work in the Great Lakes area around what we call the areas of concern, which of course were harbors, most of which were Superfund sites, the entire harbor. And so I had one of those in Waukegan Harbor and clean that one up of PCBs. When I moved to Region 4 into the Atlanta office, I worked for 5 years with our Native American tribal program and really worked to bring environmental credibility to the work that they're doing. You know, so they hire some great environmental professionals now and are really top-notch operating organizations in the environmental field. And they're getting now into brownfields work. They spend a lot of time in water and air. So I've been in the brownfields program for now 10 plus years and the section chief for at least 8. So as that sage, I'm also the keeper of the keys to the armory. So my tools are in the armory, and that's where we keep our assessment grants, our cleanup grants, our revolving loan fund grants, job training grants, multi-purpose grants, and we also keep an entire suite of technical assistance, which may not have a grant with it, but it can come into a community and do a lot of revitalization planning. Again, limited resources. Great concepts, limited resources. So, you know, the challenge with these dragons, and one of the best roles for Superfund, brownfields to come in around Superfund, is to say, you know what, we can't do the frontal assault on the dragon, but we can come at it from the different angles and bolster those parcels next to that Superfund site. And if we take that multi-pronged approach, then it lays the groundwork for all the restoration of the Superfund site. And we've seen this in several scenarios. And it's not just the Superfund sites. Sometimes it's the RECRA sites. We did a very similar effort in Birmingham where we came at some of the RECRA sites by doing the outskirts, working on the outskirts and moving it in. And the communities really love it because they can see something happening more immediately. It doesn't have that same time range that the Superfund Dragon takes. We can come in and they can see the sampling, they can see the dirt removed, they can see it moving along. Our biggest challenge is getting these grants into these rural areas. It's a huge challenge for us. And our first line for outreach, we've always said, quite frankly, is the state and our environmental consultants, because they can literally go door to door. And they do. And Mississippi has been incredibly involved with communities. They've hosted real nuts and bolts kinds of let's get into the weeds of what you need at the Mississippi Municipal League every year. And then they turn around and they follow up with each and every community that shows up. That is some serious hand-holding. And we don't see that in every state, so I'm delighted to see it in Mississippi. So that makes our work a whole lot easier in supporting communities, is that they're in there shaking it down. And now we see Mississippi grants up there with Florida grants in terms of the numbers each year. And that's saying something, because Florida is always our top earner for competitive grants.
So Cindy, let me ask you this. One of the, I will say this, you know, we've got a great team that's been involved in this particular project, but there is a little bit of dumb luck, you know, a blind squirrel finds a nut kind of thing, all that kind of stuff going on. So just to give a little bit of history, and then I'm gonna let you, Cindy, give me the punchline. So this property right here, Jake's Recycling, what the city had done was they recognized that they had that number one, a recycling facility, and let's just call it a junkyard, because something that is this close to this kind of school, to this kind of church, to this kind of area, you can imagine what a junkyard looks like, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But if the city had not done due diligence before taking ownership of this property, and it was a land swap, they basically swapped this land and one other piece of property for something outside on the bypass. I don't know how they worked that the hero number one was involved in that, and the lords of the land. But would this be an eligible site if they were the recipient of the grant, if they had not done a phase one to do any phase two work, Cindy?
Well, timing is everything, right? And at the time that they received the grant, which was 2017, the answer would have been no.
Okay.
But now as a result of the Build Act in 2018, it would still depend on how the city acquired the property.
So they acquired it in 14. So the answer to your question then is too bad, so sad?
Too bad, so sad when they applied in 17. But the Build Act came in 2018, and it went back and said, look, communities, if you acquired land by virtue of your municipal business, then and you didn't do a phase one, we're still going to let you in the door, right?
Yep. Yep.
And that's just recognizing the inherent functions of the government organization. So had they come in 18 and not done that phase one, we'd let them in.
Yeah. So the thing here is, in this case, they took ownership of this property in 14, which was after the Build Act deadline. So they would not have been able to do it, but because they did a phase one,
right?
Because they did a phase one, they are eligible. So for communities that are out there right now, let me just say this: always, 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 always. I'm taking a cue from our guide, using lots of words. Always do a phase one before you take ownership, even if it's donated. And I will also say this: if it's donated to you, I want you to think about this. And this comes from a good old fashioned Protestant here. Why is somebody donating to the city or the county a piece of property?
Look that gift horse in the mouth.
Look the gift horse in the mouth, because here's
Yeah.
the thing. Either they don't want to pay you taxes anymore because it's not worth anything to them, or they want to unload it. And as a Protestant, I'm big into donation of things. And if I donate to my church something that has some problems with it, there are eternal consequences with that. So, so I do encourage you to get a phase one, even if you don't have a grant, get a phase one. So I'm gonna
I get about 3 or 4 of these calls every year, Trey.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, most of them are not municipalities because they usually have access to an attorney to ask that question first. Most of them are churches.
Yep.
See, somebody's going to donate a big chunk of their father's now deceased estate, right? That they just don't want to deal with. And somehow the church has the wherewithal to call me and say, should we take it? And the answer is no. No, but it's free.
Yeah.
Nothing's free.
Right.
Nothing's free.
So one other tool that you have, Cindy, and it's a limited amount, and I believe maybe this is a good time for you to talk about the TBAs, but who do they need to contact on that, and what exactly is a TBA and what can be done with that?
Yeah, targeted brownfields assessment. So in certain situations, and we only get about 500,000 a year, so there's not that much field work that we can do directly, but we do have contractors at our disposal where we can go out and conduct the phase one or the phase two. Obviously, phase one covers the potential applicant. We do like to screen and see if we do a phase one, can you come in for a grant? Because that saves more of our funds for other sites where we know they're never going to be competitive for a grant. But that's a great tool for us, and they can contact me, and we can take a look. We spend all of our money every year. We do, and we usually have a little list of sites that we're trying to work our way through. But this is the ideal situation. We really do want to target that TBA money to these small and rural areas where the competitiveness may be a little bit more questionable in a grant process. And we may have the opportunity to really bust open something big for them moving forward. Those are the ideal scenarios, and we look for those. So we want to see that there's some redevelopment planning going on, that you're actually thinking forward. As the sage, we look at you, we read the eyes, we go, okay, what you got going on here? And we do try to figure that out before even we invest. We want to know that you're going to do something, not just like create hope and then walk away. We need that local champion, the hero, to move it forward. And that is true, Superfund or brownfields or anything else. Without that local champion, nothing goes nowhere.
That's absolutely right.
Yep.
Nothing.
So let's we're going to move on just a little bit. So Trey also in this role was the mirror, the magic mirror, and of course truth telling is the strength here, and we can show you every blemish, wart, and defect you have, but we can also reflect the positive can-do attitude that you possess. The challenge with an environmental consultant is sometimes we are mistaken as dragon slayers or miracle workers, or in some cases, particularly with our friends at the regulators, we're thought of as Lord Farquaad. So we all, I think we can agree that we all want to see things happen. I'm gonna get on my soapbox for just a minute and move on this. So if you go to Google Earth and you go to street level for that recycling facility, you'll see this today. This is not it today, by the way. This was back in 14. I think Google Earth just did not update anything, even though they say 2020. It's incorrect. But notice this here, and remember I told you that the city did in 2014 a phase one. And if you turn around, you look here, and that may be water here, but that right there, friends, is not water. And this is an underground tank that was plopped on site. So if it is a junkyard, people out there, there better be a wreck. And if your consultant says there's not a wreck when you have this kind of stuff out here, I would consider them to be a Brownfield expert. And if they tell you that they're a Brownfield expert, they're not. So Anyway, Trey's off his soapbox. All right, so moving on with the Brownfield Grant. So here we've got, these are the properties that have been done, that phase ones and phase twos have been done as part of the 2017 Brownfield Grant. Here's Jake's one. This property here, actually a phase one was done on it, and the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians own this property here. They're very interested in what kind of redevelopment, given what Glenn showed as some of the reuse planning in phase two. And we'll talk a little bit about phase three. Here are two properties here that had some past uses that phase ones were done. A phase two needs to be done here as well. And then up here, we'll talk a little bit about these properties. So our next person is our wizard, and Thomas Wallace with DEQ is our wizard here. He's the Brownfield Program Coordinator. He has an expansive list of spells that he can use. And he also has fireballs, and among them is the NFA, the TVA, the BFA, and the Mega Fireball Mira. Again, he's thought of sometimes as a dragon slayer or miracle worker. And every now and then, one of these fireballs can cause collateral damage. So with that, Thomas, why don't you talk a little bit about the Brownfield program?
Sure. Well, when Trey brought up that we were doing a fantasy theme and I had to be a wizard, I said, well, you know what the typical trope is for wizards is that even though they have all these tools in the toolkit, spells they can use, they like to solve everything with one fireball, no matter what's going on. So, yeah. So we do a lot of the technical oversight, of course, for all the Brownfield grantees and all the phase ones, phase twos that are coming out of these grants. And we like to work very closely with the community as much as we can, and with the consultants doing this work, so that we know what they're assessing, they know what they're uncovering in some cases, and so that we can work hand in hand with them to develop a plan for how to move them forward should they discover contamination. So we had several sites, or at least one quality unicorn here that has come out of this last assessment grant in Louisville, and they had a redeveloper coming in that joined our state brownfield program, and our state brownfield program is housed in our groundwater assessment remediation division, which is also right next door to and houses our CERCLA branch. So we were able to work closely around all these kind of things and talk through internally what the area is like and what the needs are, as well as provide just good assistance to how to move these sites forward, and having a great program like our Mississippi Brownfield program. That program allows liability protection for a corrective action plan that is approved by the state to any redeveloper that's coming in to do the cleanup action. So we also, as I'm just going to go down the list here, we review all the generic QAPs and the site-specific QAPs for Brownfield grantees. And from that, if it's a site that they didn't find anything, we can issue an NFA if need be for any sort of phase twos that didn't find anything. Or we sometimes just may call them a no further assessment letter. We're just going to give them some feedback that tells them what the next steps are if anything is required. Our Brownfield program, as I mentioned, is one of those things that does require some oversight costs. As part of that application, there's a kind of an escrow fee of $2,000, and then we charge about $100 per hour. But all of that is actually eligible and considered a remediation cost, and that's going to be a big function of some of the tax incentives the state has. One of those is the 25% state income tax credit for assessment and remediation, and that's up to like $40,000 a year, I think, and $150,000 or $160,000, one of those, over the course of the life of the project. So that's a big chunk of money that comes back in this for anybody that's coming in to do assessment. And the biggest incentive that we have developed in Mississippi is Mississippi Economic Redevelopment Act, which provides a tax rebate for any sales income or state franchise taxes can be deferred and rebated to the developer for up to 15 years for up to 2.5 times the cleanup cost, whichever is less. So that means if in the case of this one brownfield site, the Team Motor site in Louisville, they discovered some chlorinated solvents, they discovered some petroleum contamination there, I believe it was some asbestos in one of the buildings. All of that has been wrapped into our brownfield program, state brownfield program coming out of that grant. The state has approved a cleanup plan for that that's going to run over $600,000, include an ozone system, and all that is going to go and be active while there's a new development being built on top of it. We've obviously taken great care and concern over any sort of vapor issues that might be there. And so all that will be addressed. I believe the foundation will have a vapor barrier on it, and we'll have ongoing testing like any sort of thing. And so from that, if it's $600,000+ cleanup costs, you're looking at 2.5 times that comes back to the developer.
So Thomas, let me ask you this. As far as the public involvement process, I mean, what all happens during this? Because I think, involvement, engagement, it's formalized in the state program. So what all happens with that? Letters, what are we talking about?
Yeah, so we are required under our brownfield program that once we've kind of reviewed and assessed and are going to approve a corrective action plan, we have a 45-day public notice period that is published in the newspaper. It is contiguous. Adjacent property owners must be notified, and there must be that comment period to allow for any sort of response. We actually received, I believe we received one comment, which is pretty rare for these. We don't always get any, but we got one on this just asking what was being done. And so we responded to that. This went before our commission for approval. It's not something that is just, me deciding that. We put this before the commission explaining what the project is and what the cleanup will be. And they make the final decision on this agreement being approved with the state of Mississippi. So with that being, part of the public involvement also is also that working hand in hand with the community. We actually had several calls, not just with DEQ and Louisville, but we had Mississippi Development Authority on with us. And that's a whole nother process for MIRA, is that they handle the application process for that. But they worked hand in hand with us to make sure all that was lined up, as it was very critical in this case. All the moving pieces came together in a row for the developer. And so we try very hard in Mississippi to really be flexible as much as we can within the law and protect human health and the environment, while still providing great redevelopment and reuse for these properties that need it and are going to be a great benefit to their community when they're done. So
Thomas had with this had a super mega fireball, which was the MIRA, which allows for a developer to come in. And of course, we needed on our team an alchemist, somebody who could work their magic. And really, instead of a horse whisperer, it's sort of a unicorn whisperer, because a lot of times I think communities, particularly rural ones, struggle to understand, well, what brings a developer, what brings a company, what brings a retailer to my community. And of course, with the challenge here, we'll talk a little bit about that with a bypass. One of the other things to remember is, if you got a bypass, a lot of times retailers want to step out there versus downtown. So with that, let me introduce to you Eric Schatz, who's with Crawford Square Real Estate Advisors. He specializes in leasing and property management, accounting, and construction management for Crawford Square. And they specialize in retail and mixed use assets in the Southeast. So with that, Eric, why don't you talk a little bit about what you guys do, and maybe give us some thoughts as to what drew you and drew Jack's Family Restaurant to Louisville.
Yeah, thank you, Trey. Also, thank you, Glenn and Thomas, for all y'all's help in the process that we went through in Louisville. That was certainly not a easy process. It wasn't hard, but it took a lot of efforts from different angles, and we greatly appreciate that. So as Trey mentioned, my name is Eric Schatz. I'm with Crawford Square Real Estate Advisors in Birmingham, Alabama. We are a a commercial real estate, retail focused company that does really leasing and management in all aspects of real estate for assets in the Southeast. One of the components that we do is tenant representation. So we work with a retailer or restaurant to find sites in new markets to expand their footprint. And so that's how we were brought to Louisville, working with a group, Jack's Family Restaurants, which is a client of ours, to expand in Mississippi. Our task is to find markets that make sense for them to go and expand their footprint. And so with that, Louisville came online and was an opportunity that we saw that we needed to execute on. So Trey and Glenn and Thomas were all a big part of that process. We identified the site that was the former Team Motors site that had some environmental issues, as Thomas mentioned, petroleum and asbestos. And so when we went to get the property under contract, they came on board to help us, with the process of the phase 1 and the phase 2. And I think that was really pivotal in getting Jack's Family Restaurants to take a risk and to, kind of open up the Band-Aid, see what was really there. Without their assistance in the Brownfield program, I don't necessarily think that would have been the case. So it was a great opportunity to see this process and this program unfold.
So let me ask you this, Eric. One thing I need to point out to everybody. So this is Church Avenue that runs. It's actually Highway 15, but you can imagine as you get into small town, this is the fundamental area of downtown. And really, if you want to look at it, the way we describe downtown is sort of working anything this way from around Cagle Street South is really considered more of an industrial feel that Glenn and his talents are involved in that. Anything here north, because right up here is going to be the city hall. There's I'll show a bigger picture on this, but over here, if you go north, actually that's not north, that's west. But if you go up, you'll run into the bypass. And so, Eric, why downtown? I mean, why not the bypass? Why not the classic Disney Cars Brownfield story, by the way, where the bypass basically helps shrivel up downtown and you've got a bunch of brownfields. But I mean, was it, what were you looking for? And what are the things, what are 3 things that maybe some of the rural communities that are out in our audience can think about that they can enhance or highlight that might actually draw some redevelopment?
So really with this particular client, they kind of see past the bypass situations and opportunities. They're more of an access and convenience focused concept, whereas some want to be, near the driver. What's the trade area? Well, that's going to be Walmart. So that's why a lot of these retailers tend to push towards those areas. However, Jack's, we saw an opportunity here that we were close to downtown, to the rooftops, to some of the employers, and we could get away from the competition a little bit and separate ourselves and differentiate ourselves. So that's kind of why the downtown area was a focal point for us. To your point about what cities can think about, I think the 3 takeaways that I kind of wanted to just offer for communities is things that they can do to help attract and make the process easier for retail and for restaurants and anybody for that matter. The one thing that I think for retail is just updating and making sure that your county tax records and maps are updated and easy to use. There's so many instances in Mississippi and Alabama that we go and this information is not readily available. And it can make it challenging on people like me that are trying to figure out opportunities and engage with the owners of the property in town and stuff like that. The second thing is just help market the retail properties. You know, if you go to Winston Partnership, they've got tabs for available properties, and industrial is there. There's retail. Well, I think retail, cities can really add things to that it's a resource. People like myself and people that work, you know, in-house at these retail and restaurant groups, they use those resources. So having those there on the city and county websites, have local people involved in contact information for those, you know, the real estate people and the property owners. I think that's super helpful. The third thing is provide or put together convincing evidence of how the population and the employers have grown or what's going on, and tell a story within the community, because demand is driven by population and employment. So when retailers see that population is growing and employers are growing or moving to the city or town, that makes them raise an eye. It differentiates them, the city or the county. So I think those are three kind of things that really can help.
Okay. Well, thank you, Eric. We're going to keep moving because we got a lot more to the story that we want to finish up on this. Thank you for that. One thing I will say too is Jim Avery, who is the land development representative or developer for Jack's Family Restaurant, pointed another thing out. When he went to one of the city council meetings or all board of alderman meetings, and they will sit in the background and not say a whole lot and see how you work together. And I have been in many a city council meeting or many board of alderman meetings where there is contention, unorganized efforts, and lots of exhaustion. And when he came, he saw how Will Hill and the board of aldermen all work together as one unit, and it showed to them that, hey, this is a community that's got their act together. So if you have that, I know it's a challenge sometimes to tell a board, an alderman, hey, remember, we're trying to, there's more to this than just your ego. You can say that, I'm not. But certainly think about those kinds of things, because at the end of the day, people are going to come and you're going to have a dress rehearsal. So this is the Jack's Family Restaurant property and project. And you'll notice I've turned this back to north-south. This is the property itself, the different grant sites, some unfinished business we'll talk about down here for other properties. What we had on site was a former bulk gas terminal. We just knew there was going to be oodles of contamination here. Nothing there. Poked holes in the ground. A number of them, did not find anything there. The antique shop, there's asbestos in it. At the Team Motor site, we've actually got asbestos. We have TCE and PCE in the groundwater. Chlorinated solvents. We have a little bit of about an inch or two of petroleum, old petroleum in the groundwater there too. Probably more related to the former Shell station. And then there's a hydraulic lift out there. So we had an oil water separator. So all of these remediation expenses that need to be dealt with. You can see here that actually this is where the hydraulic lift is, and you can see that it's still weeping a little bit of oil, but you know, obviously looking for old areas where gas stations are. This is what the antique shop looks like. We've actually put together a vapor barrier for the restaurant itself so that we protect the patrons of the restaurant. You can see where the drive-through is going to be. Here's where the remediation system is going to go, and you can see the different ozone sparge points that we're going to have there. We did all of this cleanup planning because it is an eligible expense for a corrective action plan. We did those kinds of things for them. To do the MIRA Act, there's a resolution that the mayor and board of aldermen must do. They must identify the area where the sales tax rebate will take place. And for more on that, you can obviously talk to Thomas about that or me. But I do think if you're in a different state, you might want to look at this because this is a super duper fireball that's out there. The estimated remediation costs. Yes, Cindy.
I just want to add, I saw a presentation done by the state of Michigan bragging about how great their tax incentives were. And in fine print, They said they're the best in the nation in fine print behind the state of Mississippi.
You know, this,
So nice of them.
yeah. So this particular, for me, this is a rural redevelopment type of thing. The new markets tax credits, we heard about all those. Those are, you know, you got to have a $25 million project. In this case, really, we're looking at something that's, I believe, a $2.5 million project of development costs. But notice that the multiplier. So for spending $638,000 on the front end to put in all of these remediation efforts, they'll come back in a 15-year period and basically make roughly $900,000 in lanyard. You want to look at that. So this is what it looks like in 2020. We encourage everyone to come to Louisville in 2021 and sit down and have a good meal there. Thomas and Cindy, we want you and Eric to come and let's get a picture eating together, breaking bread.
Sounds good.
So, all right. So here's the thing that I want to point out. The perfect brownfield unicorn. And we're not talking about just a particular project, okay? But look here at what we have in Louisville. We have EPA Superfund Redevelopment Initiative taking place there. We have the redeveloped Superfund site. That's actually a portion of that's being used by the city, being leased by a rail car facility. We've got an EPA Brownfield Assessment Grant. We've got community involvement, EPA and DEQ. Thomas went through some of that process. We had EPA come in at the beginning with the grant, with the Superfund program. State liability protection on this. Bonafide prospective purchaser. The city did do assessments and did a phase 1, even though it was done by Brownfield expert. CERCLA Section 128B enforcement bar because they went through the state program. There was a cleanup for the property. Jobs involved. Just to give you an idea, the project for Team Motors represents an investment of $2.25 million, excluding remediation, into the community and will create roughly 30 jobs during construction. Once operational, the restaurant will employ 45 to 50 team members and 4 to 6 managers with an annual payroll of $500,000. So that's what Cindy wants to see go into acres that then can go out and she can say, hey, cough up the cash down here in the South, right?
No, that's the monster we have to feed from our end. Acres.
All right. So Glenn, we have some unfinished business, don't we? And you're on mute. So let's talk a little bit, Glenn. Why don't you share a little bit about phase 3 to the rail park and who owns this property and maybe a little bit about these here. Because remember, I talked about downtown is roughly from here north, and industrial, light industrial, commercial is this way. So what do we got going on here in these 3 properties?
Where it says phase 3 rail park, I start with there. That's really still conceptual. We're talking about either doing some type of existing kind of covered overhang, what I would call warehousing or potential spec building in that area, depending on what we look like and how it kind of transpires. That may be more project driven than anything. If you look to where what we call the Combs and the Young properties, Trey, if you wouldn't mind kind of highlighting that area right around there are 2 pieces of property that we're looking to acquire. We recently had, that is a KCS mainline rail that goes through there. Watco Companies, which is basically a rail provider, has leased that from KCS for the next 10 years in regards to not only conducting business on it, but also improving the rail line. They have done a really good job recently of coming in and putting more infrastructure and assets and money into that investment, into that area. So that is something that we're looking to acquire, mainly because of the way it's positioned and where it is along the rail. We believe that could be a beneficial future acquisition for us. Further down to the east, which is right there where Trey, that is a piece of a parcel that is owned by the Mississippi Choctaw Band of Indians. And there has been a lot of discussion about significant retail investment there, whether it's going to be a potential I wouldn't say a travel stop, but they're looking at all kind of different scenarios on that parcel, mainly due to the fact of what is going on with the industrial side of things, with Winston Plywood being right to the east of it, as well as further to the southeast, which is Taylor Logistics and Taylor Defense Products. Those particular locations employ roughly about 650 individuals and growing. So they see a lot of potential opportunities from a retail standpoint, also with the things that are going on along with the retail clustering effect. With you have Jake's Family Restaurant, we do have a Sonic next to that. So you're starting, we've got some other boutique restaurants in that area. So you're starting to see a little bit of the retail corridor to the north, but also a point of anchor to the south of Louisville is your industrial side of things, which is the what we call the rail park, which I would refer to as the Superfund site, but also with Taylor Logistics, Winston Plywood. So the areas in red are opportunities for us that we're looking to explore even further. So it's been a really positive thing. Some of the former landowners like Georgia Pacific, as we know, they have a big presence to the southeast, even in Atlanta is where their headquarters are. We're having a lot of fruitful discussions on potential uses of their past property. So a lot of big things have been happening in Louisville in regards to using EPA and MDEQ and the opportunities that they allow us to be catalysts for continued development in rural Mississippi, which has been a very big thing for us.
So we've got some unfinished business, and I showed you some of the characteristics of the perfect brownfield. One thing we'll point out is this is the neighbor's gas station, which this is the First Baptist Church right here. Across the street is City Hall, and they get to look at this lovely thing here. We can talk more about the challenges between city zoning and code enforcement. Cindy and Glenn and I have talked about how a brownfield project, sometimes you got to use a carrot, sometimes you got to use a stick. We don't have time for that today, but certainly there is a UST right here, and then on the back end another UST. We did a phase 1 and a phase 2 out here. We did not pull the tank because this property, for me, has potential for a UST removal that maybe a developer or a Starbucks, because I think this would be a perfect little drive-through Starbucks kind of, not necessarily Starbucks, but something of that nature, coffee place where the mayor can come across. Glenn's office is not very far from there either, to come over and grab some coffee, Mother's Morning out, those kinds of things. And a tank yank could very well be something that Mira tackles on that as well. So here's the thing, going back to my list of the perfect unicorn, assuming, so is this the perfect unicorn? And I am now believing that it is not. So what we're going to do is have the sequel. The sequel is this. EPA Brownfield Assessment Grant sequel, unfinished business. The City of Louisville actually, with the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians and Winston County, went together and did a coalition grant application a mere week ago to look at all of those properties that Glenn was talking about on the industrial side, but also to finish up some business in the downtown area. So there's 2 target areas again. It may be that we did not, so the sequel, the perfect unicorn, would have an assessment grant tank pull. And then finally, maybe, well, we are hoping that Mississippi DEQ turns around and applies for an RLF this next fall. And wouldn't it be great that we have an RLF that is available to loan money out on a low interest loan to Eric's clients that can then not tap into their own capital resources like Jack's did, but turn around and do an RLF and then get the Mira tax rebate on the back end. So my thinking, folks, is this: stay tuned for the sequel. We've had Brownfield Unicorns 1, and hopefully with the sequel, we will all live happily ever after. Well, once they receive a call from EPA in May 2021. So anyway, That is what we got. Do we have any questions from the audience? I do see where Sally has a question about phase ones and that, let's see, what if a prior property, now everybody's kicking some stuff. What if a prior property owner, a city takes ownership to a junkyard? Could the local government get assistance from EPA, even though they did not do a phase one? I think what Cindy was saying, and Cindy, you can maybe chime in on this very quickly. You can do a phase one.
You know what, we can get to a phase one on that property if the city is not the grantee. So if the grantee was the county or the PDD, great. They can come in and help you do phase one, phase two, even cleanup planning. But because you own the property, you can't get to a cleanup grant because you still retain liability. Cleanup grants require that the applicant be the owner at the time of application and that they not be liable. So we can't, the short answer is we can't get you the cleanup grant, but we can get you everything short of that.
Now, one thing I do recommend for some of the states, and I know a lot of people are logging out and heading to the next deal, but here's a thought. If you have $128.8, Cindy will recognize that there is still eligibility issues you got to deal with.
Yeah.
What we did at DEQ and what Thomas is doing some nowadays is taking the 128A money, use it for your salaries, fringe, indirect, that kind of stuff, and whatever dollars you have from the state, use that towards phase ones and phase twos, because there may be some flexibility in what Thomas has is what's called uncontrolled sites dollars, where you don't necessarily have to worry about all of those hoops. And so we've done that in the past, where just think creatively in terms of the pots of money and the limitations there. So that's another tool in the toolbox.
Keep knocking on doors, Sally.
Yep. All right. Any other questions? Well, hopefully we've answered those. We will obviously, you can contact some of us during the rest of the session. Notice that Trey Hess is, of course, himself in this one. And we will, with that, we appreciate everybody's time, and hopefully you learned a little something, and look forward to talking more about brownfields. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.